In this video, we're going to be looking at a second role of the thyroid gland, but this time looking at how it regulates anabolic processes rather than catabolic ones, specifically involving the regulation of how much calcium ions are present within human blood. Now, as with most metals, calcium exists in its ionized form when it exists in solution, but when it is stored outside of the blood, most calcium within the body is the structural component of what makes up human bones, where it exists as this complicated ionic compound, a mixture of calcium, phosphate, and hydroxide ions. If, however, the calcium levels in the blood get too high, the body does have a way of filtering out extra calcium using the primary filtration organs of the body, the kidneys, which are used to produce human urine. Now, if the calcium levels within the blood get too high, basically what the kidneys can do is pump the extra calcium out of the aqueous part of the blood, collect them into urine, where the urine is excreted from the body during urination. Now, the control about how much calcium is located within bones and how much of it is pumped out into the urine is largely regulated by the activities of two thyroid hormones, the first of which is what we call calcitonin. Not surprisingly, from the prefix, we can see that this one is probably important in regulating calcium levels, but the other name, which we call parathyroid hormone, is not particularly helpful. Now, to shorten this mouthful here, we can condense parathyroid hormone into PTH. Now, before we talk about the effects of calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, we need to do a little bit of a preview in terms of looking at human bones. Now, one common misunderstanding of human bones is that they are relatively inflexible and don't change, which is actually untrue. Your bones are going through microscopic changes even when you reach adulthood, but obviously your skeleton that you're born with is not the same size as the skeleton that you will have when you're an adult, which means the human skeleton is undergoing very large changes at times, especially again during puberty, and these changes are mediated by two types of cells that promote bone growth and degradation respectively. The first type of bones are what we call osteoblasts. You can recognize that they are involved with bone from the prefix osteo, which indicates that they have some sort of function related to bones. And osteoblasts are the cells found around the solid parts of bones that promote bone growth, whereas the opposite type of cells are what we call osteoclasts, which promote bone degradation if bones need to be cannibalized in order to get a certain supply of calcium, or if bones need to be broken down in order to repair them, for example, in the case of bone breakage. Now, on to the process of actually regulating the amount of calcium that is found in blood. So we start in a hypothetical situation where the calcium ion concentration in blood is abnormally high, which means we have a lot of calcium in the blood that is not being used either in the nervous system or in the composition of human bones, and this acts as the stimulus for the thyroid gland to produce the first of our calcium regulatory hormones, calcitonin. And what calcitonin does when it migrates from the thyroid gland to the bones in the body is that it inhibits the function of osteoclasts, which are, again, the cells that are used in bone degradation, which means that the inhibition of osteoclast therefore suppresses bone breakdown and allows more calcium ions to be absorbed from the blood into bones. Another way of looking at this is if osteoclasts are not functioning, that means that only osteoblasts are functioning, and these cells are going to absorb the extra calcium that exists in the blood into them so that they can be used in order to grow the solid structure of bones. Now, remember that the parallel function of the kidney during this time is the release of calcium from the blood into urine. So what calcitonin does is that calcitonin actually decreases the amount of urine that is reabsorbed from the kidneys into the blood. In other words, this means that more calcium ions are actually pumped from the blood into the urine, allowing the extra calcium to literally be peed out of you, therefore decreasing the concentration of calcium found within human blood. And that's the overall mechanism of how calcitonin works. It works to decrease the amount of calcium ions found within the blood, either by helping it to be absorbed into bones where it can be used to strengthen bones, or to pump it directly into your urine so that you can remove it during urination. And what we see is that directly in response to the stimulus, calcitonin decreases the concentration of Ca2+, which means that this stimulus is no longer there, which naturally causes the production of calcitonin by the thyroid to shut itself off. So we can see that this is another example of negative feedback. However, this will become even more obvious when we look at the effects of parathyroid hormone. So while a high calcium concentration in blood is the stimulus for the thyroid to produce calcitonin, it's actually a low concentration of calcium 2+ within the blood that stimulates parts of the thyroid, special clusters of cells that are what we call the parathyroid glands, to produce the opposing hormone, parathyroid hormone, and that's where we get the name from. Now, parathyroid hormone actually does literally the opposite of the two effects that calcitonin does. So the first of which is that parathyroid hormone actually activates osteoclasts. So remember that the cells that were used for bone breakdown were inhibited under the effects of calcitonin, but when the osteoclasts become reactivated, that causes an increase in the rate of calcium bone breakdown, which means that more calcium 2+ ions are removed from bones and therefore end up in the blood, where they can be circulated to other parts of the body where they might be needed. Now, parallel to this in the kidneys, parathyroid hormone is also going to increase the calcium reuptake from the kidneys. So what this means is as the kidneys are filtering out all of the toxins and extra ions that are found within the blood, that means that calcium is reabsorbed from urine back into the blood, and this results in an overall increase in the concentration of calcium found within the blood. So this means overall that in the kidneys, less calcium ions, or fewer individual ions, are lost during urine, allowing more calcium to remain within the blood. Now, as the concentration of calcium increases, this low calcium ion concentration stimulus is also no longer there, which means that this acts as the shutoff command to parathyroid hormone and the activation of the opposite hormone, calcitonin. So we can see, using this rather straightforward binary feedback cycle, how one stimulus for one hormone is exactly the opposite of the stimulus for the counter or contrary hormone like this. And this is a common pattern that we see throughout the entire endocrine system. In the next video, we're going to look at anabolism rather much more broadly when we talk about the regulation of arguably the most important anabolic hormone in the body, that being growth hormone, and how its effects work in parallel to the effects of calcitonin and parathyroid hormone.